Hi and welcome back to the channel. I'm Steven from X-Kurogane Photos. Recently, I published a long-term review of this Canon 200D which I purchased more than 7 years ago. And this is an entry-level camera which was bundled with this kit lens over here. And since I had already reviewed the camera, I think it makes sense to review the kit lens as well. A non-technical one. I'm not getting into detailed charts or stuff like that. But firstly, this is the Canon EFS 18-55mm f4 to 5.6 IS STM, and in my opinion, the most impressive thing about this lens, there are two of them actually. The first one is this lens having switches on the side, and this is something completely absent in most low-budget mirrorless lenses nowadays, be it a kit lens or some cheaper prime lenses. Switches are missing nowadays, which is really sad. I suppose that this is the camera gear version of shrinkflation, where electronic parts are becoming expensive, but they need to keep the prices down, so they started removing features of any electronic products, like how your dish, your McDonald's dish or burger is becoming smaller, but the price remains the same. In my opinion, this is something I really miss in modern mirrorless lenses. You need to dive into the menu in order to toggle on and off for autofocus or image stabilization. Can't be helped, I suppose. And the second thing, which we'll get into much later, is the STM autofocus motor. The predecessor of this lens begins at f3.5, but this is f4, 4 to 5.6. Is that a big deal? I think 2/3 of a stop darker. Some people think it is an issue, some they think it is not a problem. For me personally, brighter is always better. You can shoot a f3.5 lens at f4, but you don't have f3.5 in a lens that begins at f4, if you get my point. It is also a bit sad that nowadays kit lenses stop at f6.3, f7.1. At least this one goes down to only 5.6. It makes me appreciate this lens a lot more today compared to modern mirrorless kit lenses. The next thing about this lens which I really like, the autofocus motor, because my Nikons back then, Nikon DSLRs, they were pretty loud. The camera's microphone would pick up the lens moving back and forth, the autofocus sounds, and this lens was dead silent. I was so... how do I describe it? Like, this experience back in year 2018 or so, this was something very new to me. Feeling a lens moving when you press that focus button, it is a form of tactile sensation. I know that the camera is actually working and I did not accidentally turn off autofocus. That is how I know my lens is working. But with this lens on the Canon 200D, sometimes when I press the focus button, I don't even know whether the lens is working or not. Like, is the lens actually focusing on something? Then I had to, focus on somewhere far away. Oh yeah, it is working, and then back to whatever I'm doing in front of me. That was a weird feeling to me back in 2018. However, this lens, not very sharp, if I have to be honest. Like, wide open at 18mm. I think if you are shooting something when focused to infinity, the sharpness is plenty acceptable. And most of the time when people buy their first cameras and realize that their kit lens is not good enough, it's because, they are not getting that bokeh, that background blur, rather than the corners not being sharp enough. At least that is what I observed. Throughout the zoom range, I find that the sharpness is acceptable for social media use in general, but being a photographer like myself, I love pixel peeping, and when I'm working in studio, I go for critical image sharpness. I go for the best image quality I can achieve as possible, and that is when I started to notice that the lens is not sharp enough for my own use case, at least for serious work. Of course, I am mainly a toy and scale model photographer, and while the image on the back of the screen of my camera, even when I zoomed in, appeared fine, when I go back to my computer and zoom in my image in Adobe Lightroom, that is where it felt like the picture, the photograph isn't sharp enough. The face and especially the eyes. The eyes were not sharp enough, but I wasn't certain whether the lens missed the focus or it is the peak performance of this lens. Like, this is the best the lens can do. I have no idea at all. You see, the problem with toy or figure photography in general is that the camera tends to focus on the hair region rather than the eyes, and there is maybe 2 or 3 millimeters of gap. So you miss out on that critical sharpness, and the best way to achieve that critical sharpness is to manually focus, which I did not do when I brought this camera out for street photography, including toy photographies outdoor, because I did not bring an additional tripod. But for the sake of certainty whether the lens is capable of additional sharpness, I tried it in studio with manual focus, and this is the results I got. So what do you think? Is this sharpness good enough for you? I'll leave it to you to answer, because everyone has different expectations on how much is good enough. For me, it is not good enough because I'm used to Sigma Art lenses and also Nikon S-Line. So yeah, it is usable but not good enough for me personally for critical work. Distortion and vignetting, I believe it is a non-issue. And this is another advantage of DSLR kit lenses compared to mirrorless kit lenses today, where they go for a lens as small as possible, and nowadays modern mirrorless lenses, they vignette way too much. But DSLR lenses from so many years ago, they don't vignette as much in comparison. Moving on to the next part, a quick mention, because I can't test the flare performance of this lens properly or objectively, because this lens is slightly damaged. You can't really tell unless you look very closely, and it wasn't my fault. My dad was the one using this camera back then, and he dropped this camera face down with the lens facing the ground onto the pavement on a street. Yes, fortunately there was a UV filter in front of this lens when that happened, but no lens hood. So the UV filter absorbed most of the damage. It shattered into pieces, but it did not fully protect this lens because there was no lens hood. And if you see very carefully, yeah, there are some micro scratches, tiny scratches on the front elements over here. I believe that is the lens coating rather than the glass itself. But since the lens coating is ever so slightly damaged, that could worsen flare performance, which is why I can't test it objectively. But this is what it looks like when I am pointing my lens directly at my lights over here, but this light is nowhere near as powerful as the sunlight. My biggest problem was that this is an 18mm, not 15. Canon marketed this 200D back then the same way they marketed the Canon M50, which is for content creators, for vloggers, where the screen flips to the front, and this camera has an amazing flip screen. But 18mm 1.6 times crop, this is over 29mm equivalent on full frame, and that is not usable at all for vlogging unless you want your entire face to fill up your video and you can barely see anything in the background. Like if I were to hold up my camera at as far as possible, maybe 28mm is somewhat usable, but you'll feel tired after 30 or 60 seconds because normally when we vlog, our elbows are bent a little bit and we hold the camera closer so that you don't feel the weight that much. Yeah, so 18mm is just not usable at all for vlogging, but at the same time, given Canon's marketing practices, how they love upselling their customers, I believe this could be intentional. Like they wanted you to buy another lens, which in this case, that would be the EFS 10 to 18mm lens, which I don't have one with me at the moment, but that is a great lens at the budget, right? Arriving at the conclusion of today's review, I would say I like this kit lens a lot. In many ways, it is better than modern mirrorless kit lenses today. Physical buttons, less vignetting, less distortion and so on, but not as sharp in comparison. And that is all for today's lens review. If you found this informative or helpful, give this video a like and subscribe to this channel. Help this channel grow. And until then, I'll see you guys again very soon. Goodbye.